Fly Quiet program. All Rick online. Rick should be online. Has you been unmuted?
Yes, Rick, you are a panelist in the meeting, so you can unmute yourself at any time.
Well, that happens. Thank you, Rick. I'm glad to have you join us. Just a quick introduction. Rick Dunkelberg will open. Rick is with Mead and Hunt. They've been doing environmental work and analysis across this airport for quite some time. Additionally, we'll be sharing with Paul Dunholter the details of our Fly Quiet program and explain that in greater detail. We'll look to kind of swing back to that public comment piece at some point in the presentation. I think there may be a little bit of confusion about this program versus what that noise abatement program is. So we'll make sure we try to spend a few moments clarifying the difference between those two items. So, Rick, are you ready to roll?
Get ready to rock and roll.
Wonderful. You've got the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jim, Mr. President, members of the board. I would love to have been there in person with you, but Mother Nature had a different idea, and we are socked in here in beautiful snow-filled downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma, with a little bit of too much ice to get out. As Jim said, this is an update of the Fly Quiet program. And to give you a little background, we have been collecting noise data at the airport for over 20 years. And we've been collecting it for all aircraft types that operate at the airport. We prepared a Part 150 study, which is a aircraft noise and land use compatibility study for the airport several years ago. And one of the recommendations of that particular study was the development of a voluntary Fly Quiet program for the airport, which the FAA approved, and we have been working on it. Over the last couple of years, we have developed the categories and the ranking criteria for the Fly Quiet program, who will be contained within the Fly Quiet program. And just to remind everybody, it addresses both commercial service aircraft and general aviation aircraft. And we have instituted a whole year's now worth of the inaugural year of the Fly Quiet program, and have produced the ranking and criteria for all the air operators at the airport. I'm going to hand it over to Paul now, and he's going to go through the nitty-gritty of the program and the results, and then we'll close it up with what we're doing in response to those results. So Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Rick. And if it's okay if I take a moment and thank Jerry as well too. I've actually been around for all 22 years of it. So, and one of the things I've admired about you is your ability to calmly solve problems. And, you know, there's not a problem you didn't mind trying to deal with and face and work with people to find a good solution. So I've really appreciated it, and I've enjoyed working for you and learned so much. And I also want to thank John for his last year. He's very good at pushing me to look at new ways to find things that the status quo was never good enough. So he always kept working us and all of the board. So thank you very much. So, yeah. Okay, if we go on to the next slide. So Fly Quiet is to encourage operators to fly as quietly as possible with the quietest available aircraft technology and adhere to the airport's noise abatement programs to minimize noise impacts. So it's really for those programs that are there today, how can you get them to operate as quietly as possible, and then acknowledge those that do well and work with those that don't do as well. So the elements that are part of it is really there's some categories that have been worked on, come up with, and then we measure those over time and see if there's improvement or disprovement and target those that don't quite do as well. And one is what we call fleet quality, which is, you know, not all planes are created equal. So we want to acknowledge those that use the most modern, quieter technology. So we rate that based upon how the FAA certifies these aircraft. So every aircraft made is certified from a noise standpoint. And from that data, it's a common standardized test that's done for all planes. We use that data and then rate the best to the worst and give higher points for those with the best. The other is minimizing higher noise events. We have monitors at 6 locations around the airport, one to the south at Molten Loop. It's at we call it Molten Loop. It's on Spring Gulch Road and right at the end of the airport, and then also one near Moose. And we're measuring the highest noise events there when planes generate higher noise levels, which is roughly the 10% level from the past. You say those about the 10% highest events, those that trigger that. So we're trying to minimize the times that they're higher events. So that's another part of the test. The other is the voluntary curfew hours. If anybody operates during those hours, then they would get negative points and such. Those that don't have any flights during those hours would then have, score 100 points, in that category and such. And then flight procedure compliance, we'll go over those procedures, but really there's 3 ones that we're trying to measure, and those that do well at it are scored high. Those that deviate from it aren't quite following it score lower. So those are the 4 categories that are there, and we'll show those procedures and such in a second. And then we've added some bonuses in here and wanted to get your feedback and such. And one is we call the quiet fleet bonus. And that's those that are flying the very, very newest of airplanes, like the Neos, the Maxes, and there's Bombardier plane and such. Those are the very, very new planes. They're not really much here yet. So that's for commercial, but giving bonuses if they do bring those in. And then the other for corporate jets, the stage 5 is the quietest stage standard now for aircraft. We're saying if it's 10 dB better than that, those are being counted as being special. So we're tagging those because that's something an operator can really know. Um, you know, I can buy one of these and then I'm going to do well, that type of thing. So it's that. And the other is there's a new procedure that's put in place, the RNP. We'll give bonuses if that's going to happen. We'll talk about that in a second. That's an arrival procedure to the north. And then the last we call sustainability bonus. And this is something really, if someone offsets their emissions for their Jackson Hole operations, they'll get some bonus points. If they offset their whole fleet operations, they get even more bonus points. And that's something to acknowledge because some operators do that now. Like for example, FlexJet does offset all of their emissions. Why not have that be acknowledged and known so others that do that will also get some credit? So that's a new bonus that we're thinking of adding if you feel that's appropriate and such. So on to the next. Sure.
Back to the sustainability bonus, I really like that action. Set. Sorry. Paul, my question is on the sustainability bonus. Do we have programs or are there programs out there that we can bring to the attention of these GA operators?
There are, and they're aware of some, but not necessarily local that I think would be good to bring to their attention, and
Okay.
even maybe bigger bonus if it's local offset,
Okay, great. Thank
that
you.
type of thing. Yes. So, yes, Ed. Thank you.
May, on the bonuses, is there enough incentive for them to really do something in that regard with any of these?
I don't know. That's a good question. Are we giving it enough? I've put it as 5 points. Maybe it should be more than that. Those are discretionary things. And this is for next year, the year we're on right now going forward. So that can be, at a higher amount. I think and the thing usually, if they're, you know, if that's something big for them right now too, so if they're getting acknowledged for it, that's a good win for an operator. And typically they're going to have the newer planes, which are quieter as well. So, yeah.
Mr. President. Paul, so referring back to Sally's question,
Yes.
during the open for public comment, and the concern that she raises, which if people are flying the new flight pass over the park, obviously, and they just were approved in December, but and I'm wondering if there's a way as we publish different organizations, different airlines compliance here and their points and how well they're doing, if we can separate out their compliance, the percentage of time or flights, I'm not sure what the right measure would be, that they are flying the new paths that have the less impact, that have already been approved by the FAA. I just think bringing that transparency would be, versus the overall score, would be helpful to our public if it's doable.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what we'd like to do is, besides the summary score, but also the data behind it, to make that available, what percent of time it is being flown. And the other thing that's, I think, unique to your program to other places in the past, Fly Quiet, you do it, the year's up, you take all the data, study it, and publish it a couple months later, and it's done. But it's after the fact. Here we're going to have data in a monthly level to say, oh, these people need some, discussion. We can show this is your data. Can we work with you on that type of thing? So that's what we're seeing as uniqueness for this. And I think I'm glad Sally's question, because what we want to do in the Fly Quiet is, look at it over time constantly, and then talk to those that, aren't doing as well because they may not know why. So we could encourage them on that. So,
Mr. President. Paul, I think these are all good points, and seems like, and it speaks to Sally's comment too, is that how do we communicate this best? And it seems to me like when we acquire the FBO, we have another great opportunity here that we can build into that discussion and communication with the operators, it seems to me. And I think we
Yeah.
ought to just, Jim, and I know you're already thinking about it, but as we look forward to the next phase, if you will, in the airport's culture and assimilating the FBO, it seems like a great opportunity there.
and I think so. And that, I know Rick's last slide does talk about how to put this information out there. And I think maybe we should expand on that discussion during that too, and get your input and what you think is the best options. So, okay.
Paul, may I ask a question?
Yes, Bob.
So we collect all this data, we compile the data, you rank best operators to worst based on the various inputs. And so what happens to it? Do we publish it in the paper? How do we distribute the information?
Well, currently the plan is that those that did the best are awarded for that, and that's published in whatever way is paper or sent out type of thing. Those that did poorly are contacted, and can we work with you? Here's why you didn't do so well. This is the things you could do to improve on that. And then everybody sent something on it. Those that do well often will take that as to promote themselves, in a industry of competitiveness of operators, to be able to show that they're environmentally doing well is a marketing tool for them. So we have that. And then those that aren't doing well, we have all their names, addresses, and things. Now we'll be contacting them and work with them to let them know what part they're not doing as well, so that they can work on it. So it's not just a report at the end of the year. So,
but it's essentially, we don't have care. All we have is peer pressure.
yeah.
There's no financial disincentive if you don't
Mhm.
fly the Fly Quiet program.
That is correct. It's a voluntary program. And, generally some operators will want to participate and want to do well, and some may not. So, yeah.
Jim?
Mr. President, board, listening audience, it may be important to kind of pause here and just recognize that we're one of the few airports in the country that's trying to do this Fly Quiet program. To my knowledge, we're one of the few, the only airport that's trying to make it more real-time data instead of being an annualized report and going back to folks with either that's better or worse kind of perspective. But it's really, really valuable to know that this is because the FAA maintains control over all airspace. We are not allowed to have a disincentive or a direct incentive beyond the peer pressure component. Now, I've been asked, is that peer pressure really enough to impact some parties' behavior? And the answer is yes, I believe it is there. Is it as strong as it might be if we had both the stick and the carrot? But the fact that we're communicating with these parties with the concerns of our community to the best of our ability is a step that moves the needle. I can share with you, I had a communication with a party that once we shared the scoring system, changed who they did business with. So that's also important. So it's the operator and how they behave, but also the folks who are actually utilizing those services, either GA or airline, end up looking at this and making their choices based on the sensitivity to the community. I think has merit and is worth doing.
Jim, I appreciate the comment, and obviously, you got to walk before you run, and this is a work in progress. But as we go forward, I would hope that we could work with the park and the FAA, and make the FAA aware that this is a national park, and maybe this airspace is treated a little bit differently than other airspace, and maybe I'm just whistling Dixie, but I just appreciate what you're doing. We're
Mhm.
headed in the right direction. Want to just keep making it.
Well, I appreciate that. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, you keep pushing us all together to be out there as far. And, everyone talks about John Wayne Airport. Why can't you do what John Wayne does? Or John Wayne is copying your Fly Quiet program now. So you are ahead of doing what this thing of having something almost real time is unique and the first out there. So
Go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
Okay, Mr. President. Thank you. This question I think is to you, Jim. You had mentioned that, FAA does not allow any kind of disincentives. So we have several approved flight paths now from the on the north approach that went into effect at the end of the last year. And they're approved for all aircraft. These aren't specials. These are. So is there not, is this lack of incentive or disincentive apply to approved? I mean, could we provide an incentive to fly the flight path that goes, more down the highway than the river sort of thing? Or is that explicitly not allowed by the FAA? And if you don't know, it's okay, but I'd love to explore that a little bit.
Yeah, it is not allowed by the FAA. They're all public use approaches. So what we're doing is encouraging and cajoling and elbowing those folks to try to come into a higher degree of compliance with favorable approach and departure procedures that help. Paul's going to talk a little bit about the departure and the drift that we see out of some aircraft that we'd like to see notably better. So unfortunately, we don't have that teeth, but the messaging is consistent. I think that's important for all to know is that we're constantly pushing on the operators to do better, just like you're pushing us to do better. So I think there's a real opportunity here, and there'll be varying degrees of success. It'll be frustrating at times, and it'll be better at times. I can share with you that Dustin Hobble is sitting in the back of the room. We meet with the operators, air carriers, and the top GA operators every fall and talk about operational issues. And this is at the top of our list: is how they come and go from this airport is every bit as important as we talk about snow removal or other ground-based operational impacts that we're trying to do well. So with that, I'll stand down.
Yes, Rob?
I had an information question. If you talk about groundwater issues on the West Bank and everybody switches out from septic systems and goes on county water, you take care of most of those concerns. I'm curious, if everybody that flew into here met that class 5 standard, does the issues that Sally Painter and her neighbors are so concerned about, does that drop dramatically, or is it still a volume issue that's going to be a concern?
It's both. I mean, I think there would be some appreciation of an acknowledgement of being quieter, but they have also expressed the level of activity, the volume also affects them as well. So I don't think it would, it would clearly improve things, but would it make everything go away? I don't think so. So they still generate a noise event. So. Okay, so the scoring system is really a 0 to 100 points, and we scale things and and provide some headroom for growth and improvement and such. And the categories are separated. The commercial regional jets are one group. One is the Part 135 operators. That's like the net jets, the fleet operators. And then the last is the single operator, the ones that fly under a tail number, individually owned airplane, or a small number of planes that fly that way. And then those that come in a lot versus those that come in rarely. So we try to do those ways of breaking the information up. So here's those procedures that we're tracking. So in currently, the main way to come in and land, or historically, is this conventional procedure. Comes in over Jackson Lake and comes straight in 17 or so miles straight in. That was the old conventional ILS. About 15 years ago or so, it was a new procedure at the time, new technology. We call it next gen procedure, but it curves in, it's point to point, but curves in and intersects that conventional ILS much farther down. So that was new 15 or so years ago, rarely flown, almost flown all the time now. So, and then the green is this new RNP, just went into place in December. Again, pushes things even farther to the east. Has another transition here from the south that cuts so you don't have to fly up into this area. A lot of traffic goes to this as a VOR, a navigational aid at Denor, which they would go to. So today we're tracking is they're flying this next gen versus the conventional. In the future, we'll also add in this RNP to it. And we also say this next gen, are you east of it, which is a good thing, or are you west of it, which is a bad thing? So that's our other type of thing of tracking. And here's just an example, United Airlines flights. So they very rarely fly this ILS. A lot of those have been when a missed approach happens and they'll have to go back around or things like that. But they're almost always flying this procedure, and sometimes they'll be inside of it, which is a good thing, but they're pretty much on it almost all the time. So that's what I call a next gen. There's actually 3 published procedures with the identical path that depends upon the technology in the airplane. They'll fly them differently, but the path is the same. So, and then the RMP went into place in December. It hasn't been flown yet. We'll be working on getting operators to fly it. It's the very latest technology out there. For example, it's at Denver. They've installed it at Denver. It's used for arrivals about 15% of the time now. And United, they all are participating. It's more complicated there because in a busy airspace, it's hard to mix it with regular landings because it's timed to come in. So they'll have to pull it off if there's another plane right behind it or right above it on not flying it. So it's more complicated there. The things that affect when it's flown or not is the plane equipped. It's not all planes are. Did the airline pay to make it usable? United did not pay for their Airbuses to use it yet, but their 737s do use it. So that's one of their business choices. Delta's Airbuses fly it, United's Americans fly it, a lot of others. SkyWest's Embraers fly it, but their CRJs don't. So it's all going to be different. And they have to have their pilots trained to use that technology, and they're required to track its use and how well it does over time too, which is a cost. So it's not free for an airline to do it, but they find it useful. It's repeatable, predictable. It's what they want to fly in the future all the time. So you're out there having one ready for it as they start to use them more and more. Required navigation performance. So it's and effectively it will be a railroad track. And what it does is it allows to have a stabilized landing on a curved path. So instead of having to come in from way out on that curved path, you are as stable as you are straight. And that's so you can have a much shorter final approach, things like that. So, and it's what, I don't know any airport that is, I checked John Wayne just before I left. They have one too. It's used about 25% of the time. So
Does it require visual? Can you fly
no,
it?
it does not. It can
Okay.
fly, and it's not as low a minimum as your ILS, but it'll transition. You'll come in the RNP, and the computer on the plane will transition to the ILS for the last 5 miles. So, and it's really flown by the computer on the plane.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I was
Yeah.
just going to ask, is this replaces ILS, but it really doesn't, it synchronizes with
They're
it.
synchronized. Yes. I mean, if it's reasonable weather, they'll stay on the RMP the whole way. If it's lower, close to your minimums, they'll have the computer will transition to the ILS.
I mean,
Yeah.
my reaction is on a bad weather day, that approach looks like it could be a little more challenging.
No,
Uh,
it will be flown if it's flown, because it's just as stable as
Okay.
coming straight in. So, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, the airline should save a little fuel using that.
That's the other point. It's shorter, so it saves good 10, 15 miles, and that adds up. And they're all under pressure to be sustainable. They've committed to be net zero by 2050, and so they've got to try and reduce emissions wherever they can. So yeah, and it pushes things to the east, which I think is a goal as well. You can see the going from the conventional to the next gen to this future. Everything is trying to move it east and not as far north. So if we go on, so we're tracking again, are they flying that next gen versus conventional? That's one measure. Are they east on or east of it? Are they west of it? That's another measure. And then the next one is that's actually showing how it's changed over the last 5, 6 years. You can see much less of that conventional procedure, and then much less in visual. See all those visuals that used to be there, and that's kind of nationwide in some ways too. They fly procedures now. There's less doing something visual, so they're pretty much all on that procedure. Not, there's some summer ones you'll see them. Winter you won't see them doing a visual, but they fly procedures now, and that's what'll be nice with RMP because that's a published procedure. The other thing is drift to the south. So, the procedure to the south is what is called a conventional procedure. It's a radio signal off of a navigation aid at the north end of the airport. The pilot will take off. They see that signal. It's slightly to the right. So they turn a little bit to the right as they're going south. And sometimes they may overshoot it. And that's those planes that have drifted there. If you will find the ones these ones right here that show the drift. So we're trying to measure when that happens to eliminate those. If you look, this is a commercial operators. Generally, even though it's a conventional procedure with this radio, they've taken that and translated it into a computer flown procedure. So it doesn't drift when it's flown by a computer like that. So that's why the commercials rarely have drift. Some of the GA operators that come in here, not as often, they're the ones that more likely have drift. Like NetJets would not be, because they come here all the time, ones that don't. So that's where this working with the operators, hey, this is where you're not doing as well. Can we work on that? So this is the raw data that we talked about in here of things, how many curfew flights were there or operating during the voluntary curfew hours? How many high noise events were there? What percent were they doing on each of the procedures? So raw information before we put it into scaling into the fly quiet kind of program. So that data is there, be able to track how often things like, the air carriers, when they end up in the voluntary curfew hours, is almost always a late arrival because of a weather problem somewhere else in getting in. The Part 135 corporate jets, sometimes it'd be that, sometimes they'll go out early, sometimes they'll drop at 2 a.m. or something, but we're tracking all that now and penalizing it for whenever it occurs. So here's really the scoring then. Yes?
Mr. President, question on the previous slide.
Uh-oh, how do I get back?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So you have a section here that says south departure left turn.
So
Can you explain that a little bit further?
So we thought we'd track that. It's not part of Fly Quiet, but the goal is to get that left turn going in the future. So we're putting it there and it could get added in the future, and have that. Sometimes it does occur. So we're at least, tracking it, knowing, and maybe trying to see why. And we'll again be trying to encourage it and see what happens. And as part of this new study coming on, that's really where that will come into play. And then the outcome of that may be rolled into Fly Quiet and such. But we wanted to go back and at least track it and log it. So here's the categories. Again, everything, we scaled to 25 points of those. So fleet quality score. The second circle is, do they follow those procedures well? Again, scaled 25 points if you did the best, 0 if you did the worst. Quiet events, a high number, you have very few of them. A low number, you have more. And if they operated any flights during the voluntary curfew hours. So, and then the bonuses, the fleet quality bonus. Frontier did fly a Neo for a while in here, but not very many. The issue is, and Neos are really good for fuel, so they put them on their longer flights. So you don't see a lot of Denver Jackson because it's a short flight. So, well, we hope to see that in the future. The Maxes, probably not, because the Maxes that are built are the 737-800 size, which just doesn't work with your runway here. But there's the BCS 100, which is the new regional jet that Delta has. That's a quieter plane. We hope to see that in the future here. It performs very well in this type of setting. So, but again, Frontier did the best. It had the quiet planes. They followed the procedures 100%. They had a smaller number of loud events and they didn't operate any time during the voluntary curfew hours. So they were the top score for commercial on down. Those, for example, SkyWest Delta, they had more of those late night arrivals because they have a flight later in the evening. And if it's delayed, it may end up in that hour. So, but this is the way of tracking, seeing how the different scores and all. So, um, and similar results then with the corporate. These are fortunately too many in here to read, but we have a kind of a similar scoring for the corporate jets that fly pretty regularly here. And I can't even read the Trident, I think is the top operator. They have the quietest plane. They have one of these stage 5+10 type plane is their primary aircraft that they have. You know, so they scored well on that. They followed the procedures reasonably well and didn't have that many loud events and didn't operate during the voluntary curfew hours. So that was the top ones. We try and give up, if it's 90 or above, we try and call them a top tier. And then in the middle and 70 and below, we try to call it a, low tier, and those who we would contact and see, what was the issue. A lot of it's following the procedure, and a lot of those smaller operators tended to drift to the south. So we think working with them, that number can come up. So.
Mr. President, Paul, and you actually talked to these people, right?
Well, we've sent out things for the year end, and now we're going to send out, told them about it a few months, during the year. And now with the year end, we're going to say, here's how you did. This is what you could do to improve it. Such.
Is there any you have talked to? What kind of a reaction do you get?
It's pretty positive most of the time, especially the big players, because they have people that's their job is community relations and such. So
They've got the structure to.
yes, yeah.
So when you reach out to United Delta, when you reach out to United or Delta, who are you reaching out to?
Well, couple ways, Dustin meets with them regularly for other, your normal businesses that you do, and we'll talk to them at the same time. He's often the chief pilot type of person is the one that is usually responsible. And a lot of the effort is also with the corporate jets, which are very, as you know, kind of a unique animal. They're all different. So it's really usually the chief pilot is the area that you can have most knowledge of. The problem with corporate jets that makes it more challenging is there's a lot of pilots, you know, and so they may not come here as a pilot all that often. So being able to get to them and have them aware of it takes some effort. So. And I'll go through these. Some of these are the smaller operators, and you'll notice some are right at the top. They have the quietest plane. They follow the procedures. They don't have any high events, and they don't fly at night. So they got the top possible thing, and then there's those at the other part of the spectrum. So, there is, and unfortunately, their corporate jets are only so quiet. If someone owns the quietest ones out there, we want to acknowledge that. And hopefully new ones will be built and will be over time that are even more quiet. But similar with the single operators, similar kind of data. Those with the quieter plane did the best. Often it's these type of planes that are older, louder, tend to do the best. I'm sorry, newer, quieter do the best, older, louder do the worst. So,
Mr. President.
yes.
Hey, Paul, next time we look at these, I think, just in terms of getting a sense of the experience for those who live around the airport is well, I very much appreciate we're highlighting those who do the best here because they're the first on the list. it seems like it might be informative to put the ones who operate the most. So in other words, sort this by operations.
Okay.
Because you will see on the previous slide, NetJets is obviously by far the largest GA arriver, and they're challenged probably because of the number of different pilots they have on staying on flight path.
Mhm.
So I just think that that will help us focus on you know, the organizations that might need a little nudging, a little more nudging.
Okay, yes. And, as these are created, these reports are all in these interactive tools now for reporting, so you can sort them by any category and things like that. So, they're what's called Power BI, what's a tool that allows you to do that. So that's one of the things I think will be useful, so you can look at that. So. And single operator is the same kind of thing. And here's who did the best. And I was going to let Rick speak on this. And we brought that up earlier, and I think it's time to revisit again. What do we do with this information? How do we use it to get value for improvement? And it's important to acknowledge those that do well, because they can promote it and it gives them reason to do it. So I think that's always been successful, to do that, and then work with those that don't do as well. It's not so much a punishment stick, but go to them and say, hey, these are the reasons why you didn't score so well. And some might have an old plane, and there's, and that maybe should be acknowledged more so, but some of it they just don't maybe quite understand that you can work with it. So Rick, do you want to speak from this, and maybe we'll go to the next slide and let you talk over what to do with the information we've got planned. So.
Sure.
Rick.
Thank you, Paul. Can we go back to the slide right before this? Yeah, this shows a sampling of, the low scoring operators on the right and the best operators by category on the left. And this is just sampling the top 3 or so in each one of those categories. Now, as Paul said, one of the things that we've done is, number one, last year, once we finalized the program elements and ranking, we sent out over 400 letters and 400 summary brochures to all the operators that we could identify, explaining what the Fly Quiet program is, explaining how the ranking system would go, and letting them know that we were going to start this program for Jackson Hole. And the reason I say the ones that we can identify is that a lot of the single operators and even some of the 135 operators, the addresses and owners are layered upon corporation, upon LLC, upon corporation. And so it's really difficult to kind of find out, who to actually contact with some of these aircraft. But we keep trying, and I think we're getting there, but it's a challenge. Okay, then the next slide, Paul. Just to summarize what we found this year and what we found in taking last year's data and comparing it to all of the information we've gathered over the decades, is that the fleet quality ranking categories, it shows trends in greater use of the newer generation aircraft, which is what we hoped and which was we expected. And less of the older, what we call stage 2 and stage 3 aircraft. So the stage 4 and stage 5 aircraft, which are the newer, quieter aircraft, are becoming a bigger percentage of the overall fleet. And as Paul said, we're getting more compliance with the procedure goals. Over 90% compliance, showing trends of increased compliance with the approaches. Also, we're showing a higher percentage of the higher noise levels per operation being reduced. And that goes hand in hand with newer, quieter aircraft phasing in, older, noisier aircraft phasing out. And then the curfew hour violations continue to be low, but not as low as we'd like to have them. And the thing that Fly Quiet does not track, and that can be very intrusive and annoying, is the number of operations. And that's one of the concerns and challenges we have is that the frequency of those operations are increasing. And that's very annoying. We don't track those in the Fly Quiet program. And maybe we can figure out a way to do that. But right now, we don't do that. Next slide. Okay, so what do we do with this information? And that's an excellent question. Again, we will send out letters to the top tier operators, congratulating them on doing a good job. We are preparing certificates of acknowledgement. We will send out to those operators so that they can post them on their website. They can post it on their in their pilots lounges, things like that. We also send out letters to the bottom tier, the low tier operators, and let them know that they did not perform as well as they should. Let them know we'd like to work with them, and that they are in the bottom tier of the operators in all categories at the airport. We have prepared press release that can be given to both the media and published on the website, so that it becomes public knowledge. This whole slide deck will be published on the website, so anybody that wants to can look at it. Jerry, I think, raised the point earlier that with the acquisition of the FBO, there may be some other actions we can take, and we've thought about those, and I think that's a good idea to incorporate that into our acknowledgement. Now, any other ideas that anybody has, we would totally be open to working with them and seeing how we can improve the program. With that, I'll hand it back over to Jim, and I think we're finished.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Paul. Mr. President, I suspect there'll be further questions, and perhaps you'd like to ask if the public would like to raise their hand and get engaged as well.
Before we go there, any questions from the board? John?
Thank you, Bob. I do have actually a request. But before I make that request, I want to get some context here. When I was last president 5 years ago, this program was initiated. And my question for Paul and Rick, are you comfortable that this Fly Quiet program is ready for prime time?
Yes, and
Okay.
I think I've enjoyed the efforts you've pushed us, especially the thing of making this data available right away.
Yeah.
I think that makes it truly
So if
ready.
it's ready for prime time, I think we are obligated to get this data out to the public. I appreciate, and it's important, all the work we do to communicate with the operators, sending them letters, all those things. But I was pleased to hear Rick say that this slide deck is going to be available on our website. I think anybody that wants to drill down on this data should be able to do so without having to call us and ask for the data. So I would make a request that we not only publish the deck on the website, but that we also publish information in the newspaper, not rely on a press release and their discretion as to whether they publish it or not. That we have a quarterly posting in the newspaper of some reflection of this, of the summary. And Andrew, if I can ask you to go back a couple slides. That one, I think that I don't think we want to say best operators and low scoring. I think we want to say high scoring operators and low scoring operators. We are not imposing our opinion as to who's best. We're just giving the data. And if you scored high, well, good for you. If you scored low, well, let's figure out how we can make that better. But I would encourage this type of a slide, and I'm actually going to direct staff, if I may, to take this Fly Quiet information now that we're 5 years into it and our consultants are comfortable that it's ready for prime time, and get it out for the public to see and digest, because I think it will go a long way to helping the public understand not only the complexity of what we're trying to measure here, but provide us feedback on that data. So the other visual question or suggestion that I had, Paul and Rick, Andrew, if you go back to the graphics of the aerial of the flight paths, the arrival slide, the one before this one. So it would be really helpful as we look at this, and I think if you look really closely, you can see the boundaries of the park. But what's critical for us is that we are really trying to move the noise away from the park. So if this slide is presented, for example, on the website, I would like for it to be very evident, big, bold red lines. What is the boundary of the park? So people can understand that our intention is to try to move noise outside of that area. Thank you. That's my comments.
I would very much agree with something in the paper. Some of the fairly large display ad periodically, we have a lot of the second homeowners here and at Christmas, try to basically step up a little bit of peer pressure. And then one of the things that may be a crazy idea is publishing it in the Wall Street Journal, because the folks that are flying in on these commercial jets are typically corporate folks that read the journal. But Ed, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. President. First thing I want to do is compliment Paul and Rick on the work they've done. And I want to compliment Jerry and John, who have been long serving board members. John, I actually was on that meeting 5 years ago when we were starting, because Jim had asked me to participate in Fly Quiet programs. So I realized the intensive work that's been done on this program, but it even goes back so much earlier, Jerry and John, and I just congratulate everyone involved for the effort here, because I know there's been a groundswell of comments from people in Molten Loop and those general areas around that have now been spending more time in Jackson the last 2 years with COVID, and realizing the noise that some of them hear. But this effort by the airport precedes their comments by many, many, many years, in an effort of the airport to really take a leadership role and how we are sensitive to noise, intrusion, and all the rest. And it's greatly to the park. How do we stay out of the park? Because I remember those comments. And flying down the river. No, we don't want to fly down the river. We want to make that turn. I'm just, this RNP procedure for me, it's almost like a VFR entry. You go downwind and base, and you're on final, and it's great. And technology fortunately allows that, and not everyone's going to understand how significant that is from a technological standpoint, but it really is, to be able to do that and do it safely. So kudos for all the work. Jim, you and your team, for what you're doing to facilitate it. Dustin hiding back there. And importantly for the airport board many years before my entry here, for taking this leadership role, because what you said, Paul, for me, it was a good one. John Wayne is now copying what we're doing, so for our little airport is really taking great initiative. And I think if the community wants to help, not just read about it and maybe throw stones, but to help, and what can they do to make this even better? That's where we all win big time.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. So I wanted a quick clarifying question to Rick. He said that we can't track operations in the Fly Quiet program, but I see operations on the table. So I'm a little bit confused. So if you could clarify that, it'd be helpful.
Yes, let me clarify for Rick. So I do that a lot, yeah. Glad he's not here. But, we do track how many there are, but you can't say, oh, you can only have 30 and you're done. You can't track how often they come in or control that. So we
Well, he
can't
meant
limit the
control
number. Yeah,
versus
you can't
track.
control the number that they do, but we can track how often they do. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so if we go to the procedure slide, Andrew, the one that shows the new RNP slide,
Yes.
yeah, there you go. That would more access and usage of that would make a significant impact, I believe, on the park experience. And I'm wondering if we should revisit how we're measuring fly quiet, because there's 25 points for all the different categories and then 5 extra bonus for flying RNP. And maybe one of the things we can consider is knowing that being on procedure and RNP is really going to be the biggest lever to impact the noise experience in the park, to give more points, more heavily weighted versus the other measures. So I'm just going to throw that out for you all to consider. But it seems to me if we could get a much higher percentage using RNP, assuming they have the capability, and give them major kudos for it, it will impact very directly the experience of those and the wildlife in the park.
Well, I support that. I think adding more weight to it and the more that can be used, it will be a challenge because it is something very new and that they're struggling across the country on getting them used and operational and things. So, but I think that, the more we work on it, the better potential for success.
It's an approved procedure.
It's an approved procedure. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, let me finally respond to Valerie. You did a great job, Paul, but
Yeah.
a couple things. One is that's an excellent point. And that brings me to the point I wanted to make is that this is the first year of really implementing the program. And as we go through it, I think there'll be fine things we want to tweak as we go through the program. In addition, we need to remember that there may be additional elements to add, such as Paul is suggesting we add a sustainability bonus, we add more R&P bonus. This program is designed and meant to be changed as we go through, the future dates. We want to make it better. We want to tweak it. And so we're always going to be open for those kind of suggestions to help make it better. And then the third point is that the Wall Street Journal is not a bad idea. And an even better one that I've seen work is that there is a peer industry noise newsletter, which we can publish the results of the Fly Quiet program in that particular newsletter and let the peers of these operators see how each other are doing. And that puts peer pressure on them up on an industry basis more than just a local basis.
Mr. President.
Jerry?
And Mr. President, I just want to, just on a macro basis, I want to say I've known Rick and Paul for the entire 22 years I've been on this board. And that's a acknowledgement to the board for identifying with the park noise as an issue going well back into the 80s in the initial lease period and all of those periods, and setting up a procedure that got us to the point we are now. So acknowledgement for that, acknowledgement to Rick and Paul for staying with it, and not that we haven't paid them handsomely along the way.
Well, Rick,
But
anyway.
having said that, we're in a great position, I think, and I think the more communication, the better. I think everybody around the board has said, listen, what we need to do is find a way to communicate this to the rest. Just like the closure of the airport, it's going to take consistency and repetition, just time and time and time and time again. But we're at a point now to where working with the park, we really have really defined the arrival, and the challenge now is going to be on departure. It's not as easy, and honestly, it's just not. And the challenge is going to be, and Ed mentioned it, it's becoming more aware as we gotten busy. Well, we acknowledged that back in the 80s when we knew the noise within the park was going to be a big issue. Now we've got another issue. Well, sticking with the park and refining the arrival, the departure is going to be the challenge, and it will be another 20 years from now. And so I think the way to process that, have the data, we've got a great start, and building on that for the future, I think will help, the culture that we've developed here around the environment, and will be best served in our community by staying with it. So just want to put that seed in.
Mr. President, one other thing that strikes me is as we talk about recognizing the good performers, the what low score or best scores, highest scores, high scores, the high scorers, and I don't know if this is viable, but Chip and Jeremy thought that a communication from maybe a joint communication from the park and the airport might be a more meaningful thing, that someone gets a recognition from Grand Teton National Park for their flight. I mean, maybe that one does get their attention, and maybe that gets consumers' attention. But I think we've got a hammer there that maybe you can help us with. If that's something you could do. So.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, think anything else from the board? I think, Andrew, we have a couple folks with their hands up, I think.
Yes, Mr. President. Are you ready to hear some more public
Yep.
comments? Okay, so I will go over to Jim Stanford. I'm gonna go ahead and request unmute. You still have to hit unmute on your side, and you can proceed with your comment.
You there, Jim?
Can everybody hear?
Yep.
Good morning, and thank you very much for making this meeting accessible in various formats, and also for sending out with the meeting agenda some of the information about what's being discussed here today. Briefly, before addressing the Fly Quiet program specifically, because I have the opportunity, I just want to thank and congratulate Jerry on his years of service. We have worked together well over the years, and I've always appreciated your leadership. And shifting gears to Fly Quiet, my thanks to Rick and Paul for their continued sharp work. It's been a very diligent effort, and I'd be remiss, even though this has been a team effort by the board and the airport administration for years, I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Mr. Eastman for his leadership. I'm proud to see this taking shape and becoming something that we in the community can use. We can use it as you've talked about in recognizing the carriers that are doing well by the metrics, and also pointing out the carriers that are not doing so well. And I think that is an important point. And while we were told the FAA would not allow any sort of a financial incentive, I did appreciate the comments from Mr. McLaurin regarding incentives, financial. If we could somehow link high performance, once we had our metrics fine-tuned to know who were the top performers, if they got a discount on fuel, and when they purchase fuel from the airport, say, that becomes a real strong incentive. And I would encourage the board to keep thinking along those lines. And as you work with the FAA, to continue looking for opportunities to provide some real financial incentives. Want to thank Valerie, who presaged my input about the use of the RMP. It's a voluntary use of RMP. And when you're talking about the impact for Grand Teton National Park, and you're talking about the impact specifically to the wild and scenic stretch of the Snake River within Grand Teton National Park, voluntary use of that RMP is what's going to have the most effect, not only on the natural resources, on the quiet, the potential impacts to wildlife, but also the visitor experience. And it's very helpful to look at the different colored approaches. When you look at the next gen approach, it was certainly something that the airport worked on and was touted as an accomplishment, and it certainly is moving some impact away from the lakes and away from the heart of the park. But when you look at where the next gen flight path comes over the Snake River, you can see very clearly where the Buffalo Fork River is. And the next gen approach comes over the Snake River essentially at the confluence or even above the confluence of the Buffalo Fork and Snake. And that's virtually the entire stretch of the wild and scenic Snake within Grand Teton National Park. And that helps explain, while Next Gen was touted as being a big improvement, those people who are most often on the Snake River have noticed very little improvement. In fact, as the volume of flights has increased so much, the impacts have gotten far worse. And that helps explain to some of you, while I was very bewildered at times as Next Gen was rolled out and I was inviting the board to take a flow trip in Grand Teton National Park and experience it for themselves. So thank you for the continued work on this. I think the suggestion of publishing this in a prominent ad, a full page ad in the weekly news and guide, for instance, will not only show the operators, but also the consumers. The consumers can bring pressure, not just in the choices they make as to which carrier they fly, but we've seen that corporations are often very sensitive to public pressure. And I think there'll be a lot of people in this community looking to do something about who's performing well and who isn't performing well, especially as we fine tune the metrics going forward. We get those metrics right for the impact to the park and conversely, the impacts to the neighborhoods on the south. I think this is going to be a real useful program. And my final comment, and I'm glad that Rick and Paul drew attention, it's the sheer number of aircraft operations and the volume of disturbance. You can use the quietest aircraft, you can use the RMP, you can use the best practices. The sheer volume is becoming more and more of a problem, and the airport potentially could risk running afoul of the 1983 operating agreement. Thank you very much for your time today, and thanks for the continued work on this program.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Appreciate it. Andrew, is there someone else with a hand up?
Mr. President, we have one more person with their hand up. Mary Kaufman, I'm going to go ahead and request an unmute with you. Go ahead and also unmute on your side, restate your full name, and proceed with your comment.
As Andrew said, my name's Mary Kaufman, and I'm a homeowner living south of the airport. I want to thank you also for this meeting and explanation of the Fly Quiet program. And I just had a question of clarification. You noted when you were talking about the results that you recognized the highest performers, which, you know, this last year was Frontier Airlines on a commercial basis, and that you send letters and work with the lowest performers. I was just wondering what you do with those performers that are in the compliant range, because looking at those airlines, that includes Delta and United, which obviously have the vast majority of the flights, and would, if they could improve to a higher performer, would have the most impact on the number of noise events and things, because, you know, as Jim Stanford just said, it's becoming a issue of sheer volume, not just, you know, individual, you know, flights and their scores. So that's my question. Thank you.
Mary, this is Paul Denholter, and yes, thank you. We actually did send letters out to everybody that we could contact, including those in the middle. We probably misstated that, so it is sent out to everybody. We are especially going towards the tops and the bottom, but in reality, we should talk to everybody because that in the middle may want to get in the top. So, so I think that's a good point. We need to, I mean, unfortunately for airlines, it's not that many, but for the corporate jets, there's a lot of them. So, but I think especially those that operate the most to start there, but I think we'll trying to, you know, work with everybody really. So,
Thank you, Paul.
yes.
Any other hands up, Andrew?
Nobody else has their hand up.
I'm going to close public comment on this item. Anything else, Paul or Rick or Jim?
I just want to echo all the comments that have been raised here. I mean, it was always driven toward you know, outreach and make sure that we can work toward improving conditions. Having lots of data is valuable and important, but it's really what you do with that data and how you push off of it to change behaviors and conditions is what this was entirely focused on. And I'm only aware of a handful of these kind of programs in the country. So we continue to kind of work our way through. Your feedback's valuable because, you know, all of the airports that are trying to address these issues square up is trying to come up with good ideas as well. So very valuable feedback for all of us, and give my thanks to Paul and Rick for their efforts.
If I could make one last time, some of Jim's comments earlier about the next gen procedure, and you know, he's right. It did move it over a lot more of the Snake River. But I remember when Jerry and Ray Bishop asked the FAA, hey, what can you do to help us? And that was the best they could do. That's the most they could move that at the time. And now, you know, if Jerry wants to look back and think about what he's accomplished in life, you know, that went from a zero use to almost 95+% use now during his watch and things. And now the new technology is available to really get what I think Jim is hoping could have happened before. This RMP really does move it over the highway, not over the Snake River. So, um,